I never used to worry about small things. I wasn't the kind of husband who obsessed over every detail, who checked messages or questioned late nights. I believed in trust. I believed in us. But something had changed. It started subtly, like a shift in the air that you can't quite explain. A different tone in her voice, a hesitation before answering a simple question, a certain carefulness in the way she carried her phone. At first, I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, every couple goes through phases, right? Then, one evening, Odette stood by the mirror, adjusting the delicate chain around her neck. It was a necklace I hadn't seen before. The dress she wore clung to her in a way that made my stomach twist. "Going somewhere?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She smiled, an easy, practiced smile. "Just dinner. Nothing big." I tried to keep my expression neutral, but I felt something tighten in my chest. "With who?" She turned, applying a final touch of lipstick before meeting my eyes in the mirror. "Some friends from work. Just a small get-together." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. I watched as she grabbed her purse, hesitating at the door for just a second before flashing me one last smile. Then she was gone. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. I sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had been standing. My mind wrestled with itself, torn between logic and gut instinct. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was nothing. But if that was true, why did it feel like something was slipping away? The house felt different after she left. It wasn't just the silence. It was the weight of something unspoken, something unresolved hanging in the air. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the untouched plate of food on the counter. Odette had barely touched her dinner before getting ready to leave. That wasn't like her. She loved our evening meals together, always making small talk, laughing at her own jokes. But tonight, she had rushed through it, distracted, her mind somewhere else. I walked to the living room and sank into the couch, phone in hand, thumb hovering over her contact name. I wasn't going to call. I wasn't going to check in. That would make me seem insecure. Paranoid. I hated that word. Still, something gnawed at me. I opened a news app, hoping to distract myself, but I couldn't focus on the headlines. Instead, my thoughts kept circling back to her. The dress. The necklace. The way she avoided eye contact when I asked who she was meeting. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the coffee table. Stop it. I wasn't that kind of husband. I wasn't going to let suspicion poison my mind. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, then two, I found myself watching the clock more than the TV. Normally, she would text. Even a simple, "Dinner's going well," or "Heading home soon." Tonight, nothing. I told myself she was just caught up in conversation. That's what normal people do, right? They enjoy themselves without feeling the need to check in every 5 minutes. And yet, a quiet voice in the back of my head whispered, "Something's off." I shook my head and exhaled. I needed air. Grabbing my keys, I stepped outside. The night was cool, the sky stretched wide and empty above me. I walked down the sidewalk, hands in my pockets, mind racing. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, I already knew the truth. This wasn't just a regular night out. Something was changing between us, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face what that meant. The night air did little to calm me. I walked without a destination, my thoughts spinning in circles. It wasn't just that she'd gone out. It was the way she had done it. The way she had dismissed my questions with practiced ease, like she'd already thought through her answers in advance. I knew Odette well. Too well. She used to be terrible at lying. I could always tell when she was hiding something. The slight stammer in her voice, the way she'd play with her wedding ring absent-mindedly. But tonight, she had been smooth, effortless, and that's what scared me. I found myself at the corner of our street, staring at passing cars, their headlights flashing across my face. A thought formed in the back of my mind, one I tried to push away. What if I just went to the restaurant? Not to spy, not to confront, just to see. The idea unsettled me. I wasn't the type to check up on my wife like some insecure fool. But this wasn't insecurity, was it? This was something else. A gnawing sense that I wasn't getting the full story. Before I could second-guess myself, I pulled out my phone and opened the app we both used for dinner reservations. She hadn't mentioned the restaurant name, but I had a feeling. Odette was predictable in some ways. When she wanted to impress, she chose places with ambience. Not too noisy, not too casual. Something refined. A few swipes through the app and I found it. Valerio's Bistro. A reservation under her name. Table for two. I stared at the screen for a long time. Two. Not some friends from work. Two. I clenched my jaw, my heart pounding as the realization settled in. This wasn't just dinner. And I was done pretending otherwise. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood there, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. Table for two. I read it again, hoping I had somehow misinterpreted it. But the words didn't change. My brain tried to come up with explanations. Maybe someone had canceled. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she just forgot to mention it. But I knew better. My feet carried me back toward the house before I even realized I had turned around. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me, but I didn't sit down. I couldn't. Instead, I paced the living room, running through every possibility. Had I really been so blind? I replayed the last few weeks in my head, searching for moments I had ignored. The time she had come home later than usual. The way she had started taking her phone with her to the bathroom, something she never used to do. The unexplained laughter at her screen, followed by a quick lock of the phone when she noticed me watching. It had all been there, hadn't it? Little signs. Small, almost invisible cracks. I had just refused to see them. I sat down heavily, my head in my hands. For a moment, I thought about calling her. Not to accuse, not to fight, just to see what she'd say. Would she lie? Would she hesitate? Or would she tell me the truth? But I already knew the answer. Instead, I opened my messages and scrolled through our recent conversations. Nothing seemed unusual, just casual text about dinner, groceries, small everyday things. But something caught my eye. A message from her, sent yesterday afternoon. I might be late tomorrow night. Work stuff. Don't wait up. I swallowed hard. She had set the stage for this in advance. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't a last-minute dinner with friends. This had been planned. The thought made my stomach twist. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to think. If I acted now, if I stormed into the restaurant demanding answers, I would look like the crazy, jealous husband. The one who couldn't handle his wife having a life outside of him. And that's exactly what she would say, wouldn't she? No. I had to be smarter than that. I had to see it for myself. So I grabbed my keys, slipped into my jacket, and stepped outside once more. I wasn't going there to cause a scene. I was going there to understand the truth. And once I had it, there would be no turning back. The drive to Valerio's Bistro felt like an eternity. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I kept telling myself I wasn't overreacting, that I wasn't the jealous husband chasing ghosts. But my gut knew better. It was past 9 when I pulled into the parking lot. The restaurant was softly lit, the kind of place that whispered exclusivity. A valet offered to park my car, but I waved him off, too preoccupied to care. I didn't walk straight in. I wasn't here to start a scene. I was here to see. So I stood near the entrance, heart pounding, scanning the dimly lit dining area through the large glass windows. The soft hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the flickering candlelight, it all felt normal. Peaceful, even. Until I saw her. Odette sat near the back, in a corner booth. She was leaning slightly forward, her elbow resting on the table, her fingers playing with the stem of her wine glass. Across from her sat a man. I felt a punch to the gut. He wasn't some faceless stranger. I knew him. Jonas. A name I hadn't thought about in years. Jonas had been a part of our lives long ago, before the marriage, before we built this life together. He and Odette had dated briefly in college, but it had fizzled out. I had never thought much of him. Just a past name in her history, someone who had come and gone. Except now he was here, sitting across from my wife, smiling at her in a way that made my stomach churn. I took a shaky breath, pressing my back against the cold brick wall of the restaurant. My fingers curled into fists. It wasn't just the fact that she was having dinner with an old flame. It was her expression. She looked different. I knew my wife's smiles. I knew the polite one, the forced one, the genuine one. But this? This was the kind of smile I hadn't seen in a long time. The kind that wasn't for me anymore. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I could turn around, walk away, pretend I never saw this. But as I stood there, watching my wife laugh at something Jonas said, tilting her head just slightly, just like she used to when we first started dating, one thing became painfully clear. I couldn't unsee this. And no matter how this night ended, something between us had already shattered. I couldn't move. I was stuck in place, watching my wife smile in a way I hadn't seen in years, except it wasn't meant for me. Jonas leaned in, just slightly, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass, and Odette mirrored the motion. A synchronized dance, effortless and familiar. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to believe this was innocent, but the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her eyes lingered on his face, it wasn't casual. It was intimate. Something she hadn't been with me in a long time. I forced myself to focus. I needed to absorb every detail. If I confronted her later, she'd deny, she'd twist, she'd gaslight unless I had facts. So I studied them like an outsider observing a play. Odette reached for her phone, glancing at the screen before flipping it face down. Was she checking if I had texted? Was she hiding something? Jonas said something, and she laughed, a real, full laugh, when I couldn't remember the last time I had been the cause of. Then, her hand moved slightly over the table. She wasn't touching him. Not yet. But there was an unmistakable pull between them, a charged space that felt like an invisible thread tying them together. I clenched my jaw. I had spent years believing in trust and loyalty in us. But at that moment, watching her lean into him, as locked on his in a way that made my stomach twist, I realized something painful. I had already lost her. Not tonight. Not just because of this dinner. It had happened slowly, over months, maybe even years. A quiet, gradual shift, the way a tide pulls sand from the shore. And I hadn't even noticed. The worst part? She wasn't hesitating. She wasn't nervous, checking over her shoulder. She wasn't thinking about me at all. I took a deep breath. I had a choice: barge in, make a scene, demand answers. But that wouldn't fix anything. Instead, I reached for my phone. If she could play games, so could I. I snapped a picture of them, capturing the moment she laughed at whatever he had just said. Then I typed out a message. Me. Hope you're having fun at work. Let me know when you're done. I'll be home. I saw her pick up her phone as soon as it vibrated on the table. Her face changed in an instant. The laughter faded. Her smile stiffened. She bit her lip, hesitating before glancing up at Jonas. He didn't notice. He was still talking, still relaxed. But I knew her well enough. I had shaken her confidence. She had expected me to be home, waiting, oblivious. But now? She knew I was watching. She stared at her phone for longer than she should have. I could see the gears turning in her head, the carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. Odette had always been good at keeping control and making sure she was one step ahead. But my message had thrown her off balance. She slowly set the phone down, her fingers resting against it as if touching it too quickly would make the situation real. Her expression changed, just for a second. A flicker of guilt, maybe even panic. But then, just like that, it was gone. She turned back to Jonas, forcing another smile, but I wasn't fooled. She wasn't listening to him anymore. Her mind was here, with me, wherever she imagined I was. I stepped back into the shadows, my breathing slow and controlled. I had spent years believing in her, trusting her. But now? Now, I was watching her think of a way to lie to me. Jonas must have noticed her shift. He tilted his head slightly, reaching for his drink. He didn't ask what was wrong, though. He didn't seem concerned. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't the first time they had been here together. This wasn't an accident, some innocent dinner that had simply gone too far. No, Jonas was comfortable. He belonged in that seat. How long had this been happening? Had she lied last month, too? What about all those nights she said she was too tired or too busy to spend time with me? The memories flooded in, like puzzle pieces finally falling into place. I pulled out my phone and typed another message. Me. I'll be home. Whenever you decide to come back. I hit send and watched. Odette flinched this time. She turned her phone over again, her jaw tightening just slightly. Then, as if sensing something was off, Jonas leaned in closer, whispering something. Her lips parted, then pressed shut. She didn't answer him right away. Instead, she looked around. For the first time that night, she looked nervous. She knew. She knew I was somewhere close. And that single moment, the hesitation in her eyes, the way her body tensed, told me more than I ever wanted to know. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a life she had built behind my back. And tonight, for the first time, she realized she might lose it. She didn't see me, but she felt me. The way her body stiffened, the way she forced herself to keep smiling at Jonas, all while gripping her phone as if it might slip from her hands, I had gotten to her. And that was all I needed. I didn't need a confrontation. I didn't need to demand answers. I already had them. I stepped away from the restaurant window, my heartbeat steady now. The emotions that had been swirling inside me, anger, disbelief, betrayal, had settled into something colder. Something final. I wasn't going to wait for her to come home with excuses. I wasn't going to sit through a rehearsed speech about how it wasn't what it looked like, or how she had just gotten caught up in the moment. She had already made her choices. Now, it was my turn. I drove home in silence, my grip relaxed on the steering wheel, my mind running through the steps ahead. By the time I walked through the front door, I knew exactly what I had to do. Her closet, the bathroom counter, the little shelf by the bed where she kept her favorite jewelry. I gathered everything that belonged to her. The perfume she sprayed before leaving that night. The shoes she had kicked off by the door. The framed wedding photos that suddenly felt like relics from a different lifetime. One by one, I packed them all into a suitcase. By the time I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway, I was sitting on the couch, waiting. The front door creaked open. She stepped inside, hesitating when she saw me. Her coat was still buttoned, her phone clenched tightly in one hand. She forced a smile. "Hey," she said, too casually, too careful. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached beside me, grabbed the suitcase, and slid it toward her. Her face paled. For the first time in years, she had nothing to say. She didn't even try to lie. And that silence? That was all the closure I needed.